Imagine this. You're sitting across from someone who shattered you. Maybe it was a parent, a lover, a friend. Maybe they didn't scream, didn't hit, didn't even raise their voice, but they erased parts of you with silence, with indifference, with absence when you needed presence the most. And now, years later, someone whispers to you, you need to forgive them for your own peace. A scream you swallowed years ago, a fist that never hit the wall, a truth you buried beneath politeness, morality, and spiritual maturity. And something in you recoils, not because you're spiteful, not because you want revenge, but because, if you're honest, there's a fire inside you still burning. But with finally holding on to the rage, the injustice, the betrayal you were never allowed to fully feel. You were told forgiveness was the first step to healing. But what if that's a lie? You're abandoning them? What if the path to inner peace doesn't begin with letting go? And what is anger, if not darkness we're told to hide in shame? Yet that darkness is alive, pulsing, waiting. But wisdom? What if your pain isn't ready to be forgiven because it hasn't yet been heard? What if, in bypassing your anger, you're not rising above your wounds to apologize for your pain, to feel guilty for not being ready to move on? Carl Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." You've been trained by culture, religion, maybe even therapy to tame your fury. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe you are too sensitive. And so, forgiveness becomes anesthesia. You go numb. You call it peace. But deep inside, something begins to rot. Being told to forgive and forget before they've even learned the language of grief. Now imagine that child grows up into you, into so many of us. Well-mannered, emotionally intelligent, spiritually evolved, but silently seething, exhausted, struggling with intimacy, sabotaging joy, smiling while somewhere inside the child is still screaming, "What about me?" But what if your refusal to forgive is not weakness? What if anger isn't a prison, but a compass? What if forgiveness, rushed too soon, becomes spiritual self-betrayal? Because under every rage is a rupture. Under every fury is a fracture of love. That you take the poison, but smile like you're healed. That you forgive not as an act of power, but as an act of repression. And under every refusal to forgive, there is a deeper refusal to abandon yourself again. You see, there is a secret most never tell you. Forgiveness can be a weapon when wielded by the wounded too early. It can be a subtle form of gaslighting self-inflicted. You start to question the validity of your pain. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Can you really heal while pretending not to bleed? Imagine a child broken by someone they trusted but unconditional self-loyalty. So here's the paradox no one wants to touch. What if healing begins not with letting go of anger, but by finally letting it in? Not to act on it, not to become consumed by it, but to witness it, to allow it, to understand what it came to protect. You were not wrong to be angry. You were wronged, period. And yet, somehow, culture demands that you turn your rage into grace before it's ready. But real healing, the kind that doesn't crumble when life tests you again, demands something more raw, more primal, more honest. Can you stand in front of the fire you are told to fear and feel it burn through the lies? What if the truest form of self-love is not unconditional forgiveness? So before you forgive anyone, before you make peace with them, ask yourself, have I made peace with my own pain first? Because if not, then forgiveness might be premature, a mask, a performance, and you deserve more than a performance. You deserve truth. Even if it screams, even if it burns, even if it begins with something that scares the world, your anger. And perhaps the question isn't, when will you forgive? But rather, when will you finally let yourself be furious? The world has a problem with anger, not because it's dangerous, but because it's powerful. And power, when it's born from pain, scares people. From childhood, you were taught that anger is something to be feared, suppressed, judged. Maybe you were sent to your room when you raised your voice. Maybe you were told to calm down when you cried. Maybe you learned, early and deeply, that being good meant being quiet, that feeling rage made you bad, that raising your voice made you like them, the people who hurt you. So you swallowed it. You made your anger small, polite, palatable. But the psyche remembers. Carl Jung saw the psyche as a vast inner ecosystem, one where every emotion has its place, even though society shames us. We've turned forgiveness into a currency for moral superiority. The quicker you can say, "I've let it go," the more enlightened you appear. He believed that the unconscious mind contains not only our deepest wounds, but also the keys to our wholeness. Yet what is often buried in that unconscious? Anger. And not just the flaring, loud kind, but the ancient, ancestral kind. The grief that curdled. The loyalty to self that turned into rage when the world denied your worth. And what is premature forgiveness if not accepting someone else's value system over your own emotional reality? You learn to mistrust your anger, not because it was false, but because it made others uncomfortable. And this is where the wound deepens. In a culture obsessed with optimization, self-improvement, and peace at any price, we've spiritualized bypassing. But what if this performance of peace is actually a betrayal of the soul? Nietzsche once wrote, "He who cannot give himself his own values must accept them from others." When you bypass your anger, you surrender your agency. In his view, true healing required confronting suffering, not avoiding it. He believed that humans could endure nearly anything if they found meaning in the pain. You tell your inner child, "Your pain isn't worth feeling." You quote spiritual gurus while your trauma repeats itself in every relationship. When your boundaries were crossed, when your truth was dismissed, when your dignity was stolen, anger was the guardian at the gate. It kept you alive when forgiveness would have annihilated your identity. You tell your unconscious, "We're not strong enough to go there." And there's nothing more uncontrollable than righteous rage, especially when it comes from the oppressed, the silenced, the survivors. And so, instead of healing, you fracture. You smile while your nervous system screams. You meditate over your memories, where no one rebels because they're too sedated by artificial peace. This is not healing. This is hiding. How often people of color are asked to move on from systemic trauma. How often children are urged to respect the very parents who hurt them. These aren't isolated incidents. They re-patterns of power, protecting itself by neutralizing the one thing that threatens it. Anger rooted in truth. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, warned against mistaking comfort for meaning. But how can we find meaning in pain we refuse to admit we still feel? What role have you been playing? The peacemaker? The spiritual one? The mature one who rises above it all? Anger is the doorway to meaning. It points to where something sacred was violated. It is the body's last line of defense against erasure. So why do we rush to silence it? Because anger, unlike sadness, demands accountability. Society fears what cannot be controlled. Aldous Huxley once warned of a dystopia not ruled by fear, but by distraction. A society that anesthetizes the soul with comfort. It keeps the score, and the score says, "You still haven't let yourself feel." Forgiveness misused can become that sedation. Think of how often women are told to forgive abusive partners. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that freedom begins when we stop accepting the roles society scripts for us. And when you finally try to forgive, it doesn't work. It doesn't land, because you skipped the step that mattered most. But what if true freedom begins the moment you stop performing healing and start embodying it, even if it is messy, loud, inconvenient? What if the path to forgiveness requires a stop no one wants to make, the pit of fury you were taught to fear? Jung called this the shadow, the part of you you disown in order to be accepted. And often, that shadow is made of fire. Not evil fire, but transformative fire. And fire, when contained, does not destroy. It illuminates, it forges, it purifies. But when repressed, it becomes depression, anxiety, psychosomatic illness, emotional fatigue, repetitive trauma cycles. You think you're being above it, but your body knows better. So the hidden problem isn't that you're too angry. It's that you've never been allowed to be. And so your anger doesn't just burn inside. It metastasizes into resentment, into self-loathing, into emotional exhaustion. The radical act of saying, "I'm still mad," and that's okay. This is the psychological rebellion no one teaches. Validating your own fury before asking it to soften. It's not about revenge. It's about recognition. Because healing isn't just about what you let go of it. It's about what you refuse to let go of until it has been seen, held, honored. And nothing demands honor more urgently than the part of you that still aches to scream. There is a strange numbness that sets in when you suppress the truth of your anger for too long. You don't even realize it at first. It doesn't arrive like a scream. It creeps in quietly, like a fog. At work, you're efficient but detached. In relationships, you feel present but hollow. Joy becomes fleeting. Rest doesn't feel restful. You laugh, but your nervous system doesn't believe you. But what you've actually made is a deal with silence. I want to disrupt the order of things if you promise not to hurt me again. This is the price of bypassing your fire. You think you've made peace, but silence isn't peace. It's self-abandonment dressed as maturity. And eventually, your soul starts to rot in the cage of civility you built to avoid conflict. Your body knows. It keeps whispering beneath the surface. You feel tired for no reason. You struggle to connect. You overthink every interaction, every decision. You begin to mistrust your own instincts, the kind that makes you feel like a ghost in your own life. Why? Because unresolved anger doesn't disappear, it just changes form. Sometimes it becomes depression, not the slow sadness, but the heavy, inexplicable kind. Sometimes it becomes people-pleasing, an obsession with harmony, a fear of confrontation, a compulsive need to be liked, approved, and validated. Other times, it mutates into chronic guilt, a low-grade shame that simmers in your chest, whispering that you're wrong for feeling anything at all. You were taught that anger is dangerous. But here's the deeper truth. Denied anger is far more destructive than expressed anger. It doesn't go away. It seeps into your identity. Is a scream that never got the chance to live. It becomes how you see yourself, how you love, how you show up in the world. The parts of us we deny don't die. They become exiled. And those exiled parts often return, not as memories, but as projections. You hate your partner's moodiness because you haven't let yourself be moody. You're triggered by someone else's boundaries because you never enforced your own. At some deep level, you betrayed you. You begin to choose peacekeepers over truth-tellers, jobs that numb over paths that ignite, relationships that require shrinking over ones that allow expansion. And in the quiet of your own mind, something else begins to grow. A silent resentment toward yourself. Because deep down, you know that you've been lying. You know that behind the "I'm fine." Carl Jung believed that repression creates a split in the psyche. A fragmentation. You turn your rage inward. You become self-critical. The rage finally erupts, but without precision. It lashes out at people who don't deserve it. It poisons your present with ghosts from your past. It pushes away the very things you want to let in: intimacy, joy, truth, anxious, even self-destructive. You micromanage your feelings. You overanalyze your flaws. You punish yourself for not being more healed, more enlightened, more over it. This is how the unconscious works. What you refuse to acknowledge in yourself, you begin to see in others. You see betrayal everywhere because, and here's where it gets dangerous. Unprocessed anger can lead to two psychological extremes: internal implosion or external explosion. In the first, in the second. And both of these outcomes have one thing in common. They keep you trapped in a life that feels like survival, not liberation. This isn't just a personal problem, it's systemic. We live in a culture that rewards disassociation, one that celebrates productivity over presence, niceness over truth, control over honesty. From schools to workplaces to relationships, we are taught to tolerate, to endure, to be the bigger person, often at the cost of our own emotional reality. You're praised for being composed while you're dying inside. You're admired for your maturity when you bite your tongue through every injustice. You're told you're strong because you don't react. But suppression isn't strength. Reacting isn't weakness. It's data. Every time you suppress the need to express your truth, especially your anger, you reinforce a dangerous internal message. My reality is unacceptable. My emotions are invalid. My boundaries are negotiable. Over time, this becomes not just a belief, it becomes your identity. And when that happens, you begin to lose the most vital thing a human being can possess: a clear relationship with yourself. You no longer know what you want. You question what you feel. You forget what your own voice sounds like. You confuse compliance with peace and emotional numbness with spiritual growth. You live a life that looks good on the outside, but feels like exile on the inside. The psychological cost? You attract people who exploit your silence. You stay in situations that echo your original wounds. You forgive people who haven't changed because you've been told it's the right thing to do. And in the mirror, you no longer see a warrior. You see a ghost. This is the hidden tragedy. The more you bypass your anger in pursuit of peace, the further you drift from your power. But here's the turning point. What if the very anger you feared was the part of you most capable of saving your life? Not performance, but spoken? What if that rage was never meant to be silenced? What if it holds the blueprint for your boundaries, your worth, your healing? And what if, by feeling it fully, not acting on it destructively, but honoring it deeply, you could finally begin to truly forgive from a place of wholeness? But first, something has to die. The lie that healing means being calm. Because sometimes, healing means burning the facade down before anything real can rise in its place. Now imagine this. You wake up one morning and you don't try to be calm. You don't meditate your pain into silence. You don't journal yourself into submission. You don't pray away the fire in your chest. Instead, you listen to it. And for the first time in years, you don't flinch. This moment of radical allowance is rebellion. Because the most revolutionary act in a world that demands your compliance isn't forgiveness. It's feeling everything you are told to forget. To break free, you don't need to learn how to forgive. You need to unlearn how to suppress. Carl Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And yet we've tried to intellectualize and spiritualize our way around that pain for too long. The rebellion begins when you stop trying to be above your emotions and start standing inside them. You begin by turning inward, not with judgment, but with curiosity. What are you really angry about? Who crossed your boundary before you even knew you had one? What part of you was violated under the disguise of love or guidance or doing what's best? And then you ask, what did that anger come to protect? Because that's the paradox. Anger is not destruction, it's defense. It's the soul's immune system. And just like the body, the soul inflames what's been infected. Not to hurt you, but to alert you. You've spent years apologizing for symptoms instead of treating the source. Now it's time to rage, not outwardly, not destructively, but ceremoniously. You let yourself cry without filtering it. You write the letter you never send. You scream into a pillow like a goddamn animal if you have to. You give the unspoken words a voice. You say, I hate that this happened to me. You say, I deserve better. You say, I am allowed to be angry. This is not regression. This is integration. You are not becoming your pain. You are reclaiming the part of you that held it when no one else did. And with every moment you allow that anger space, something begins to happen. You feel your spine straighten. Your breathing deepen. You stop seeking permission for your existence. This is what it means to reclaim your sovereignty. Because healing is not about returning to who you were before the wound. It's about becoming someone who could never be wounded the same way again. And to become that version of yourself, you must commit to truths that society won't validate. You do not owe forgiveness to people who are unrepentant. You are not less spiritual for still being angry. You are not broken for feeling what happened still matters. You stop trying to impress others with your emotional maturity and start impressing your inner child with your ferocity. In fact, that's what makes you whole, your refusal to forget what shaped you. This kind of healing requires a shift in allegiance from outer peace to inner loyalty. Because let's be honest, your inner child doesn't want your zen. They want your protection. They want you to say, no one will hurt you again, not even me. They want to see you stand in your fire, not to burn others, but to light your own way. And what begins to rise from those flames is not chaos, but clarity. You start to see the patterns you once called fate were actually choices you made while abandoning yourself. You realize the people who drained you were only sipping from the well of your silence. You see how every suppressed truth became a magnet for more of the same. And then almost quietly, you stop. You stop trying to explain your boundaries. You stop trying to make your pain make sense to those who caused it. You stop trying to win the compassion of people who lost the right to witness your tenderness. It's liberation through self-trust. And only when the fire burns all the way through can the soil be ready for something new. This isn't coldness. This is emotional adulthood. But now, it's not a performance. It's not a spiritual bypass. It's not a virtue signaling to your inner critic. The rebellion is not rage for rage's sake. It is from this ground, this scorched earth of truth, that authentic forgiveness can be born. It's a quiet, sovereign act that says, I no longer need to carry the residue of your choices. I don't forgive you to release you. I forgive you to release me. But here's the key. You only get there by walking through the fire, not avoiding it. Those who bypass anger never reach real forgiveness. They reach detachment, indifference, numbness. They say, I don't care anymore, but their body is still screaming. True forgiveness is born only after the rage has been honored, the grief has been cried, the inner voice has been heard. And this is why the rebellion is so rare, because it takes tremendous courage to feel that much truth, to look at yourself and say, I was hurt, and I'm not over it. I matter even when I'm messy. I am angry, and that means I'm alive. So when people ask, why are you still angry? Don't shrink. Don't explain. Just smile and say, because I stopped lying to myself. And in that moment, you've already begun to break free. You've begun to rebel, stepping off the treadmill, daring to face the shadow you've spent years outrunning. The world's promises of happiness, those glittering lures of success, approval, and endless joy have started to lose their shine. You've seen the trap for what it is, a psychological prison built on the lie that happiness is a destination you can reach if you just run fast enough. The promotion that left you hollow, the relationship that didn't fix you, the endless scroll for validation, they failed because they were never the point. In Man's Search for Meaning, he wrote that happiness cannot be pursued. It must ensue as a byproduct of living for something greater than yourself. Frankl found meaning in the depths of suffering, in the choice to affirm life, even when it seemed unbearable. Jung would agree, Meaning emerges when you face your shadow, when you integrate the parts of yourself you've been taught to reject. This isn't about achieving a state of constant joy, but about embracing the full spectrum of what it means to be human. It's a truth that makes your past struggles not just bearable, but essential. Jung saw the psyche as a dynamic system, always seeking balance between opposites, light and dark, joy and pain, self and shadow. To chase only one side happiness is to deny the other, creating a lopsided existence that can never feel whole. The moments you labeled as failures were not mistakes. They were your psyche crying out for balance, begging you to stop running and start listening. But now, standing in the quiet aftermath of your rebellion, you sense there's something more, a deeper truth, waiting to be uncovered. Carl Jung, who spent his life mapping the uncharted depths of the psyche, would say you re on the verge of the ultimate realization. Happiness I ascend to the goal. It's a shadow cast by something far greater. To grasp this, you must confront a truth that redefines everything you thought you knew about yourself and the world. This ultimate truth is deceptively simple, yet it cuts like a blade through the fog of modern life. You are not meant to chase happiness, but to create meaning. Jung believed that the purpose of life is individuation, the lifelong journey of integrating your conscious and unconscious selves into a whole. Happiness, as the world defines it, is a fleeting byproduct, a mirage that distracts you from this deeper work. When you chase it, you're chasing an illusion, a surface ripple that vanishes the moment you try to grasp it. Meaning, on the other hand, is the ocean beneath, vast, turbulent, and eternal. It doesn't promise comfort, but it offers something more, a sense of purpose that anchors you, even in the storm. This realization flips everything upside down. All those moments you felt empty, despite checking every box society handed you, suddenly make sense. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust, arrived at a similar truth. Imagine standing in that misty forest again, the one you've been wandering in search of happiness. Now the mist begins to clear, and you see the truth. The treasure was never at the end of the path. It was within you all along, buried in the shadows you feared to face. Pursue a passion that scares you. Sit with your discomfort instead of numbing it. These are not acts of chasing, but of creating a life aligned with your deepest self. Jung believed that every individual who undertakes this journey transforms not just themselves, but the world around them. Your rebellion, your meaning-making, ripples outward, challenging the culture that keeps others trapped. Every doubt, every pain, every moment of longing was a guidepost, pointing you toward a deeper understanding of yourself. This is what Jung meant by individuation, not a finish line, but a process of becoming. You don't arrive at meaning. You live it, moment by moment, choice by choice. This realization is both liberating and haunting. Liberating because it frees you from the exhausting chase, from the need to prove yourself to a world that doesn't know you. Haunting because it demands courage to face your fears, to question the lies you've lived by, to build a life that's true to your soul. Jung's contemporary, Aldous Huxley, warned that modern society thrives on distraction, keeping you too busy to ask the big questions. But now you're asking them. What do you truly want? Not for happiness, but for meaning. What parts of yourself have you silenced to fit in? What would it look like to live as your whole self, shadows and all? The final step is to act. Start small, but start now. Speak a truth you've held back. As you stand at this threshold, the forest no longer feels like a maze. It's a mirror, reflecting every part of you, light, shadow, and all. You don't need to run anymore. The ultimate truth is this: you are enough, not because you've achieved or acquired, but because you're willing to become. Step forward, not toward happiness, but toward yourself. The journey is the treasure, and it's only just begun.